Hello, everybody. Welcome to Post Political Podcast. My name is Derek Britton, and I am excited to talk with you all this week. We had a week off last week, but we are jumping back in with a double episode week this week. So tonight we have Dan Fishman, which I'm very excited to talk to. He used to be a pretty close locally to where I live now up in Massachusetts, and just excited to talk to him about a bunch of different stuff. And next, later on this week, we have Stacey Pressman coming on from the New York City mayor race. So I'm excited for this week. It's going to be a good week of podcast episodes. And it's been a good week of weather up here in Massachusetts. So I'm just in generally a good mood. We actually got to be outside in t-shirt and shorts today. And yeah, it's been great. So let's get started with the promos, and then I'll bring Dan in. So first up, we have the Vermin Supreme Institute. Our purpose is to inspire social evolution through disruption of authoritarianism, to promote compassionate activism, and to spread knowledge of redacted history. Through the use of humor, direct action, and mutual aid, we uplift the disaffected, the disenfranchised, and the disempowered. And I'm very happy to announce that I actually have a lot of the write-up and some of the results, I guess, from the Love and Action fundraiser that folks helped and donated to here. That benefited the homeless camps in Reno, Nevada. So I will put out the link after we're done. But if you go to verminsupremeinstitute.com, you can go and check out the Love and Action fundraiser and how it went. There's a post up on the site to get more info. So I will share that with everyone after the show. And next up, we have the Brewed Coffee in Lexington, Kentucky. If you want, you can go check out Brewed Coffee and Beer Drinkery. I will put my affiliate link in the comments as well, and you can go in and check out, they have mugs, hats, shirts, masks, different bags, all sorts of stuff. So go in if you want to support the podcast, use my affiliate link and check out some of their stuff. And lastly, we have our promos for the Post-Political Podcast shop. So we have the Bridge Kids Give Back fundraiser. So 100% of these proceeds will go to the Bridge Kids Give Back charity in Massachusetts. And they are an incredible group that we just interviewed a couple weeks ago. They committed to feeding, clothing, and uplifting the homeless and unhoused community one family at a time. And we are also doing a promo with the Trans Resource Network of Louisiana down in New Orleans. So if you want, you can go onto the Post Political Podcast shop. And you can check out any of the merchandise there. Like I said, 100% of the proceeds will go to either the Trans Resource Network of Louisiana or Bridge Kids Give Back, depending on the merchandise you buy. And yeah, just if you want, you can donate directly with the PayPal links. That they're both also up on the image here, and I'll put them in the comments as well. So if you want, those are two amazing mutual aid projects that are going on and great groups to work with. So let's now bring in Dan. So Dan Fishman is the executive director of People for Liberty and the former executive director of the Libertarian Party. And we're going to be talking about a bunch of different stuff, collaboration with third parties, and some of the successful, unsuccessful stuff. Dan's been in the party a while, and I'd really love to get some of his insights. So let's bring him on. How you doing, Dan?
Hey, Derek. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It almost feels like I'm back in Massachusetts without the traffic.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. Yeah, the traffic hasn't gotten a ton, even with COVID. I'll be honest, the traffic hasn't gotten much better.
My dad lives down on the Cape, and he's like, yeah, the bridge is still terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, and 490, I'm on the 495 belt, and the 495 belt is still just as bad as it's always been. So traffic hasn't got much better. But no, I'm super excited to talk to you. I know I've seen you, here and there about a bunch of different things, but we've never actually had a ton of time to sit down and talk, just you and I. And even in the pre-show, I didn't even know the show was coming up because we were in such a good, conversation. And so I appreciate a lot of the stuff that you've done for the LP Massachusetts, the Libertarian Party in general. And I kind of want to hear, what was before this? Like, what was your story kind of to get to the Libertarian Party, and how did that work out for you, I guess?
Well, so it's kind of a weird story. I guess to go way back, I had a very, very fortunate, very privileged upbringing. My dad's a scientist, and my mom was a librarian. So academic challenges early on. I was always a huge reader. And by the time I got to college, I had some pretty clear ideas of what I wanted to do that changed as soon as I got to college. So I ended up, my first job out of college, I started off at the University of Texas. And then in 1989, I started teaching. I was working at a psychiatric hospital in Liberty Hill, Texas, which is just up 183 from Austin. And I loved it. It was a great job. I met a girl, and she got a job in Boston, and so we moved. I taught 2 more years in Boston, but like 1 year after we moved to Boston together, we broke up because that's just the way those things go.
Yep.
And I regret leaving Texas all the time, even besides that. But I was happy in Massachusetts. So I taught 2 more years in Massachusetts. I was in a relationship where I thought we were going to get married, have kids, and as misogynistic as it might sound, I thought me man must provide for a family, and it wasn't going to happen on a special education teacher's salary. And so I decided to go back to school. I went back to UMass Boston. I got a computer science degree. Mid-90s was not the worst time in the world to get a computer science degree.
Yeah.
So I came out. I worked for a startup called anyday.com. If you believe in patents, which I actually don't, but I and my team invented the online calendar. And then we were bought by a company called Palm, which the old people remember, the old Palm Pilot.
Oh, yeah.
And so we were the first person to do sync between a handheld device and a calendar and address book on the internet. And my name is on the patent for that as well. So if you ever do that, think, hey, thanks, Dan, did a good job on that.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that. That's kind of cool. I didn't. Yeah.
It's a weird thing, and but obviously, that was my second career because I'd been teaching. Then I went back to school and I did startup. And then 2000, the .com crash. Palm lays off the entire Massachusetts office. So I went to work for Mass General, which for people outside of Massachusetts, Mass General, sometimes called MGH, which we argue stands for man's greatest hospital. It is, in my opinion, the greatest hospital in the world. And I'll just tell a quick story about that. People outside of Massachusetts, people are probably aware there was a terrorist attack in Massachusetts at the Boston Marathon. And 187 people were wounded. Every person who made it to a hospital survived, which is just an unbelievable result. And you will hear me complain about Massachusetts till the cows come home, the taxes, the government, all that other stuff. But on this day, all that shit that they had been preparing for, it worked exactly the way it was supposed to. And they saved lives at an unbelievable rate.
Yeah.
So I will always remember that. I'm proud of all the work I did. When I worked for Mass General. And then in 2010, there was an ad on Craigslist, back when Craigslist was still a thing. And it said, looking for software architect with background in special education. And my wife actually saw it. She's like, I don't know why they just didn't write Dan on the ad.
Yeah.
So I went out there, and it's a company called eSped, and I went out and worked there for 8 years. It was in Andover. It was awesome. And I really enjoyed it. Then in 2017, eSped got bought. And then in 2018, it got bought again. Both times triggered equity events for me. And in August of 2018, and I'd been doing libertarian stuff throughout this time, and I'll go back and go through that history a little bit. But in August 2018, the second company that bought us was called Thoma Bravo, and they're a pre-IPO company. They came to me and they said, Dan, you're really old, and we're paying you a lot of money. And so we'd rather pay you a severance check and get you off the books before the IPO. I'm like, that's awesome,
Right.
Because now I can run for work full time. I can run for office full time. And, this was a race that we were looking more competitive than I thought we would have when I ran for auditor in 2018. So I was able to get out. I took the money and ran, quite literally. I campaigned every day in between August and November. I was somewhere else in Massachusetts. I drove all over the state. And in the end, we ended up getting endorsed by the 2 major papers in Boston, in Massachusetts. We were endorsed by the Boston Globe and the Worcester Gazette-Telegram, actually also the Lowell Sun. So all the major papers in Massachusetts. Springfield doesn't have a newspaper because people there can't read. But that's all right. That's a Massachusetts joke. I'm going to be doing them all day, folks.
I'll be laughing.
Yeah, exactly. So but a week before the election, I was speaking to League of Women Voters in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is Democrats squared.
Yep.
But I'm not going to win in Massachusetts if I don't get Democrats to vote for me.
Oh, yeah.
So I give them my whole speech, and I had a great campaign slogan. Why would you elect a Republican or a Democrat to audit Republicans and Democrats?
Right.
And then we had a television ad that was very successful. I give them the whole talk. I talk about all the scandals, and I can see people nodding along in the crowd. People are agreeing with me. At the end of it, the talk, a woman stands up. She says, Dan, I love everything you have to say, and I think you'd be an amazing auditor. But the party has told me that if I don't vote blue all the way down the ticket, that shows weakness in the Democratic Party. And that allows Donald Trump to build the wall. And I cannot have that. And I'm like, man, we are fucked as a country.
Yeah.
And so that same week, Nick Sarwark posted, we're hiring an executive director for the Libertarian Party. And so, I'd planned to just go back to software. That's what I do best. But I am good at doing things. I'm good at completing projects. I'm good at focusing a company and a group of people on a task and making sure that we complete it. And I thought the Libertarian Party can use that right now. So I talked it over with my wife, and she agreed. Go do it. Go chase your dream. And so we sold the house and moved down to Washington, D.C. And I did 2 years as executive director, which I'm very proud of the stuff we did. We increased membership by 50% while I was there, took donations to the highest level they've ever been, and pulled off 2 online conferences, the first online conventions ever. The first one we had to do with only 10 days notice, which was just insane. And I mean, that was an example of sort of some of the, if we're going to spill a little tea about some of the, as the kids say, some of the problems that happened.
Yeah.
I actually had presented a plan in March of 2020 for how we could do the online convention.
Yep.
And it was a really good plan, but it was going to take 5 weeks to implement it because it was with a software company called Votes.
Yep.
But they had run 45 countywide elections across the country. So they had experience with much larger elections, and essentially they offered us a package. They say, you guys can do as many votes as you want, and we'll handle all that stuff for, I think it was $11,000 was the final price, which in retrospect was a bargain.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I couldn't convince the LNC to do it. There were people who were very opposed to having a backup plan because it felt like they wanted to have the Greeks in Troy burn the ships, have no way home.
Right.
And so then, of course, what happens is that, Nick reaches the conclusion we can't have it. And so he says, Dan, you have to put on an online convention in 10 days. So we did it. And, a project like that doesn't get done without the help of a lot of people. And, I should shout out Ryan Graham and Matt Hudson. And I'm forgetting some of the people already. See, that's what happens when you get old. But I had a lot of help. And so it wasn't just me doing it. Tyler Harris, the current executive director of the Libertarian Party. Tyler was the guy who, during the convention, kept going up and down through the list of the people who were there and making sure they were actually credentialed people who were supposed to be in the room, kept the voting secure, stuff like that. So it was a really good, it was a great team effort, stuff like that. So a lot of stuff that I was proud of doing, proud of my time there. My term came to the end, and I was planning on taking some time off, quite frankly. My wife is a software engineer as well. She's got a good job. We didn't need money right away. And then Lauren Postler, who is the chair of the People for Liberty, came to me, and they had run the Let Her Speak campaign, which I think most libertarians were aware of.
Oh, yeah.
It was well executed. It reached a lot of people. And she sort of made the pitch to me. She's like, Dan, this is who People for Liberty are, and this is what our mission is. And who they are is pretty important because in addition to being libertarians, they are professionally digital marketers.
Yep.
Okay. They know how to look at the data. And like the first report that I saw about this sort of blew me away. We made this Facebook post, and then these 47 people went to this webpage that we linked to from it. Based on that, we know that these people are interested in this issue. And so we want to follow up and hit them up with these messages, stuff like that. And one of the things that People for Liberty has done is there's about 50 groups right now, but it keeps expanding.
Yep.
Women for Liberty, Christians for Liberty, Democrats for Liberty, Black voters for Liberty, Second Amendment supporters for Liberty, whatever it is, we've probably got one for you. We just opened up Gamers for Liberty, which I'm very excited about. I'm going to get some giant Among Us games going on. And that's using that level of digital marketing to find people, and then find people who aren't necessarily in the libertarian sphere, but they show up on a web page, reading an article, something like that, and being able to follow up with them and say, hey, you should see some of this other stuff that we're doing. And part of what we're doing is we're taking all the Facebook groups, and there's a plugin that we're using so that the last 6 conversations from the Facebook groups are on the web page. So if you come to a story that we've written about, for example, I just wrote something about prohibition doesn't work. And obviously that's a large thing, because prohibition isn't just, marijuana. It isn't just sex work.
Right. Yeah.
It's also borders. Prohibition is everything. It's authoritarianism. Authoritarianism doesn't work. We just talk about it in terms of prohibition. And so, but if you come to a prohibition page where we're talking about something like that, I might send you to the libertarian group of, sex workers caucus, or, cannabis supporters, or whatever, based on where you've come from, stuff like that. So what we want to do is be a larger, perhaps slightly gentler landing space for people who are putting their toe into the libertarian ocean. Because there are, and listen, I love my fellow libertarians, but there are times that we behave like territorial crabs. And if you put your hands in the libertarian ocean, your toe in the libertarian ocean, we're going to snap it off. So that's my regular history monologue. I'll just do the libertarian one very quickly. 2011, Barack Obama signs the NDAA. And I've been a dues-paying member in the Libertarian Party for 16 years now, but never thought I was going to run for office. 2011, Obama signs the NDAA, which says that the police can pick you up and hold you for questioning under suspicion of terrorism without right to a trial, without right to an attorney. And that goes to my family's personal history. My grandmother came over to Lynn, Massachusetts, because one day she came home, she with her and her 9 sisters came home, and their dad was gone. And they asked the neighbors what happened. They're like, oh, the police took him. They went down to the police station, and the police were like, yeah, we don't know where he is. The police just vanished him. And they're like, it's not safe for us to stay here. They're in the Ukraine.
Right.
And so they came over to the United States. So the idea that the United States would come close to something like that, I'm like, fuck it. I got to do something about it.
Yeah.
I have the ability to run for office. Now, I didn't know anything about running for office. I mean, I knew I was a libertarian. I wanted to run as a libertarian, but if I'd known more, I would have run a better campaign. I decided to run for Congress, excuse me, in Massachusetts 6, which is the North Shore, which is a pretty conservative area of Massachusetts. But Massachusetts politics, for people who aren't from there, is different from everywhere else.
Yeah.
So the guy I ran against, the Democrat, John Tierney, the incumbent, 8 terms in office. His wife had just gone to jail for money laundering for 30 days because her brothers were running an offshore casino, and he had filed legislation to allow offshore gambling to benefit them. Ooh. But in Massachusetts, right, that's not a strike. That's a badge of honor. The Republican,
exactly, yeah.
Right. And then the Republican I was running against, Richard Tassay, out married gay man who was pro-choice. So anywhere else, that's not a Republican.
Right.
But in Massachusetts, that's like, you Tea Party bastard. That's what the Democrat said to him. So I jumped into that race. I didn't know enough about campaigning. I'm like, you know what? I don't want to ask people for money. I'm just going to fund my own campaign. So that was stupid. because
Right.
because it's not that I wasn't going to raise more money than I put into it personally, what I spent, but you can't ask people to be invested in your campaign if you don't ask them to invest in your campaign.
Right.
And so, I had some help from the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts, but mostly it was just me on my own, and a small group of friends taking me to events. I got lucky. I got into the two candidates hated each other so much they were just brutal to each other on ads and television, and so I got invited to one debate that the Republican refused to go to because it was just so biased. It was about Medicare and Medicaid at a senior citizen home. And so I'm going in there and I'm like sweating bullets, right?
Right.
8-term congressman, Democrat. So, I like study for 2 weeks beforehand. Within 10 minutes, it was clear that I was the subject matter expert in the room on Medicaid and Medicare.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was pretty funny. But then the Republican sort of came up with the thing that where he wanted to do the same thing. So he invited me to an event that the Democrat wasn't going to show up at. And this was funny because they put it on stage and they had a third chair there with an empty microphone and they would cut to him, Richard, John Tierney, not present. But at one point in time, the reporter said to me, he said, Mr. Fishman, John Tierney has set up a website attacking Richard Tassay, and Richard Tassay has set up a website attacking John Tierney. What do you think about the level of hatred that's going on in this campaign? I said, that's one of the things that's difficult about being a third party candidate. I had to put up my own website attacking myself. Those photos of me and Derek Jeter, completely fake. And everybody laughed. And then after that, I got invited to every debate. And so that was awesome. Ended up with 4.5% of the vote. And I got a nice little letter from Bill Weld, who I'd never met beforehand, saying, Dan, I thought you were the best candidate in the race. I would have voted for you. So that was great.
Yeah.
Didn't think anything else about it. Didn't think I was going to ever run again. But the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts asked me to become their political director. So I did. So we set out with a goal to run, and you will understand how easy this is. We wanted to run more candidates for State House than the Republicans did. Because in Massachusetts, if the Republicans won every race that they ran in, they still wouldn't have enough votes to sustain a Charlie Baker veto.
Yep.
They're not even running in a third of the house of the districts. Now, we came close. We had 16 candidates in 2014, and Republicans had 24. But that was a credible showing on our part.
Yeah.
It was a great race. It was a great time. The candidates did pretty well. Party was going good. But then I thought, you know what? I'm probably done after this. I'll keep organizing and stuff like that, but I don't want to do anything. And then 2016, Bill Weld gets named the vice presidential candidate. And they come and ask me, Dan, will you be the Northeast field director for the campaign? I said, you do not want me to do that. You might have seen me running for office, but I am a computer scientist. You want somebody who can plan events, who has press connections, who can, lead fundraising, stuff like that. Who's good, who's done activism on a grand scale. And they're like, all right. Then they came back a second time. And this time it was Bill Weld, who called me and said, Dan, it would really help out. I'd feel comfortable with you doing it. I'm like, sir, I want the campaign to succeed. I don't think that I'm the right person to be doing this. And so then the third time they came back and they said, if you don't do it, we're giving it the job to, and they named a person who I knew was a complete idiot. And I'm like, you're threatening me.
Yeah.
All right, I'll do it. So I was the Northeast director for the campaign. And that was amazing because I got to see how a real campaign is supposed to work. And, there were a lot of Republican operatives on that campaign. Disagreed with them in terms of philosophy. They disagreed with us. They disagreed with Gary Johnson.
Yep.
But they knew how to do their job and they knew how to be professional. And a lot of libertarians learned a lot of stuff from that. So then in 2017, we were going to lose ballot access if we didn't have a statewide candidate get 3%. And Chris Crawford, who was chair of the party at the time, said, Dan, you should run for auditor. And so I did. And then the rest I covered already.
Yeah.
All right, that's a long monologue. I apologize.
No, that's great. It was good to get a good background, and honestly, I learned a lot from that as well, and got to hear some familiar names. So it's funny. I actually ran into Lauren early on in the Joe campaign on
Yeah.
the data analytics team. And she brought some stuff to that, and I was amazed. She'd bring some stuff from the digital marketing side, more than just the straight, data analytics piece. And I was really blown away at some of the stuff that she was saying, and it was a very different subject matter, I guess, expertise than what we were kind of running with for the rest of the data analytics group. And I had fallen off that group. I ended up getting involved with the Spike Cohen campaign on the social media side, and jumped into that both feet, and kind of didn't have time to do the data analytics at that point. But no, yeah, it's really great to see some of the success. I did follow the Let Her Speak campaign, and I thought that went really well. Actually, some of those groups helped my wife. So my wife left the Democratic Party last year.
Wow.
Joe Biden really was the last kind of straw for her. I mean, the fact that the Me Too movement just included everyone in the world except for Joe Biden was one of the biggest.
Insane. It's insane.
Yeah, it really just drove her away. And one of the big things was, Democrats for Liberty, Teachers for Liberty. Those groups really helped her understand kind of some of the libertarian. I mean, I spew enough at home for sure, but I'm sure about a minute or two into it, it starts going around the head instead of in the ears.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's about having peers that you relate to in that group. And most people, when they come to a libertarian meeting or libertarian organization, nobody there is somebody who's a peer that they can identify with, because we've all gone off the deep end and drunk the Kool-Aid. And I'm one of those people. But, one of the things that People for Liberty is really focused on is we're pushing #consent culture.
Yep.
And that's a big deal. And the Me Too movement, I mean, they understand that. But what happens is that if we can get people talking consent culture, then we start talking about how we have to have complete consent culture.
Right.
Because if you compromise consent culture in any way, you're saying, well, you know what? You're telling Anthony Cuomo that it's okay for him to put his hand on somebody else's face, because you compromised consent culture when you said it's okay for the government to take money from you.
Right.
You didn't consent to that. It's okay for the government to say you can't fish. You didn't consent to that restriction on your liberty. It's okay for the government to, stop you from putting things into your body that you want to take things out of your body, to force you to put things into your body that you don't want to.
Right. I mean, even
those
things like, feeding the homeless or participating in consensual sex between adults just because money was exchanged as well. Like those types of things just shouldn't, once you can break it down to that level and explain consent culture and kind of break it out into the rest of the world, it really becomes a pretty, at least an understandable, it's not and believe me, I think, Dan Berman's tax. I bring up taxation and theft a lot on this, but that to someone that's not part of the party, that hasn't been, in the libertarian world for a while, that's a little aggressive, abrasive, or whatever. And I get his show and his shtick, and I like it. I'm not saying anything bad about Dan, but it's just, you need a space for people to come in that's a little softer and does have peers that really can relate to them a little bit more.
Yeah, and I also love Dan Berman. In fact, he was on People for Liberty broadcast a little while ago, and he made me a better libertarian. And that's one of the things that I like about libertarianism, is that we constantly challenge our beliefs. Whereas if you're a Democrat and you challenge the party hierarchy, you challenge the party theology, that's blasphemy in their book. You're not a good Democrat. Look at the way they treated Bernie Sanders. Look at the way they treated Tulsi Gabbard. Okay. All these people who are willing to challenge it, they get thrown out. For us, we get better. And so I was a guy who when I ran in Massachusetts, and I said this in 2012 when I was running, I said, healthcare is not a right, because John Tierney had said it was. He said, healthcare is a right. And I'm like, healthcare is not a right. Your healthcare is provided by a healthcare provider. You never have a right to somebody else's labor.
Right.
We fought a war about that in this country, and you shouldn't do that. And I said that to Dan Berman. He said, Dan, I disagree with you. I'm like, well, what? He's like, here's the thing. You have a right to seek whatever healthcare you want. Nobody's obligated to provide it for you, But you have a right to medical marijuana. You have a right to experimental drugs. You have a right to, if you think somebody's going to heal you through psychic surgery, you have a right to pursue that, whatever it is. So you do have a right to healthcare. Nobody has an obligation to provide for you. I'm like, you, sir, made me a better libertarian today. And that's what's awesome, right? I've been in the party for, 16 years actively. Became a better libertarian. And that's part of what we do, is that the more we get exposed to each other, I say this all the time too, second generation libertarians are inherently better libertarians than people who have only been in the party for a while, because they grew up and they were instinctively into that. Another guy you got to look up, you're in Clinton. So I think he's actually in Clinton. My old radio show co-host, Ken Van Tassel. He was in Concord, but he's moved.
Okay.
He the best thing about having him on the radio show, aside from the fact that he's a sound engineer and he works for Bose, and so we sounded amazing.
I know Ken. I used to work at Bose. I worked at Bose. Yeah. I know Ken. Yeah.
Oh, you know Ken.
I'm like, that name sounds familiar. I don't know him. I got to talk to him, but I know I've seen him around Bose when I used to work there.
Hunt him down. Great dude. Awesome libertarian. Just had a kid. So you guys have something in common there too. Yeah. Right. So you should have libertarian play dates while you're raising your, in his case, third generation. Second, but and so we get better. And the nice thing about it is that if we recognize the fact that we grow as libertarians, the longer we're exposed to it, and I'm still growing, I just demonstrated that, we should have that patience and that tolerance with everybody else who comes in, week one.
Right.
And they only have one thing that they agree with us on. Here's if they start off with a very simple thing and saying it's the way parking tickets work is completely stupid, the government shouldn't do that, we agree.
Yeah.
We get to work with them on that, and that can be our one thing where we ally. And if we never agree on anything else, I want them to remember that we were their allies on this thing.
Yep.
Because they get to see that we're not crazy, that we can support people. We're modeling what we want. And the thing is that the people who are really the enemy of libertarians recognize that what we want is the end game of politics.
Right.
Okay. If we're successful, government has so little power that people aren't going to fight anymore for the offices. They'll be willing to serve, but nobody's going to put a lot of hate and stuff like that into it. Hopefully we get there.
I tried to make that point actually during this last election. I don't remember if it was social media or I was talking to a friend or something, but I was saying, you see all this hate and how it continues to grow and grow. And people ask, why is this hatred growing? Is it social media? Is it the regular CNN and Fox News and MSNBC? Is it that media? Is it the rhetoric kind of getting charges? And I said, no, in my opinion, what's happening are the stakes are getting higher and higher every day, because Group A wants to enforce what they think is the best on every single person in America, and so does Group B. And 50% of the country does not want that. So the stakes keep growing, and that's why the rhetoric keeps growing, and that's why the hatred kind of keeps growing between these folks, is because Group A and Group B, and I'm not saying this about the people who vote typically. The people who are voting for them are just worried about losing what they think is their perfect, candidate one way or the other. And if you ask, they just had a recent, I think it was a Gallup poll, 60+% want a third party. They don't wholly believe in Team Red or Team Blue, but they feel like they need to vote in one of those two categories, because the other side is going to make their lives so much more difficult because they've given them so much power. And it's just the power has grown, so the stakes have grown, so people are fighting it harder. And that's my opinion, but
I agree with you 100%. I remember, because I'm old, I remember the George Bush, Al Gore election. That was the first one, to really be contested.
Yep.
And Saturday Night Live did a sketch where Al Gore's on the debate stage. And he said, the Bush campaign has been so fear-mongering that, this is Miss Alice Walker, who lives in Dade County. And we asked her what would happen if she voted for Al Gore. And she said, in addition to the fact that it meant that Southern Florida would be given back to the Cubans, it also meant that her long distance service would be switched to Sprint. And that sort of thing. And that was the beginning of it. But now people are so afraid. And the thing about it is, Calvin Coolidge said, the business of America is business. The thing that we do really well here as a country is that we understand process and we understand motivation and we understand salesmanship.
Yep.
And the Republicans and the Democrats realized very early on that instead of running a positive campaign for the candidates that they liked and having to have a new campaign promoting them, they could have the same negative campaign against the other party and run that nonstop. And they've been running it for the last 20 years. Right. And that's where we are right now, is that people are voting out of fear for what happens if the other person gets elected. They don't really know. One of the things that actually, and this is an interesting thing. So in Massachusetts, 6 years ago, Massachusetts has this thing that Libertarian Party of Massachusetts take advantage of. You can ask in January your state rep to introduce a law to the floor, and they have to do it. That's the law. Yep. So I had a friend of mine introduce a law that would remove party designation from the ballot. So you just have people's names on there, and you'd have to vote without knowing what party they were in. I actually wanted to take it a step further and have some fake names on there as well. So you'd have to actually. But
that would be wonderful.
It would be. Obviously got voted down, but the point was very interesting. And if we could get to that stage, and that's why to a certain extent, I am very much in favor of ranked choice voting. We can get a little controversial on that because I know some libertarians think that approval voting is better than ranked choice voting.
Yeah.
The one thing that we all agree upon, in fact, the LNC passed a resolution to this extent, the current voting system is terrible.
Yep.
So let's take whatever is the system that has the most momentum. And right now, ranked choice voting has the most momentum. It's in Maine.
Yep.
It almost passed in Massachusetts. It's used for all the municipal elections in Utah. So, red states, blue states, people who are using ranked choice voting find that it's a much better way to break up the dichotomy.
Yep.
And have it so that people aren't not voting for you out of fear, because that's the biggest thing. So twice when I ran for Congress and when I ran for auditor, and this is the stupidest shit in the world. And I'm so happy to not be in this position where I can't swear anymore on the air. But people told me, this woman who told me that, she didn't want to vote for me because she was afraid of showing weakness in the Democratic Party, right? The Democrats were going to win. So the Democrats have held the auditor's office for 92 years now.
Right.
The idea that, voting for me was going to cost the Democrats the election was insane, even though, I did want to win. Yeah. And if we'd had ranked choice voting, they could have voted for me first and the Democrats second. And that would have been great. But ranked choice voting was defeated in Massachusetts because Massachusetts, it's a weird state because it has this weird streak of conservatism underneath where things are. And I think about this a lot. You're not going to hear me say many nice things about Mitt Romney. But when the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that marriage equality had to be the law of the state, there was a push to make a ballot initiative to change the Constitution to say marriage is between a man and a woman. And Mitt Romney delayed it. He's like, you guys are going to have to wait 2 years to get that to happen through, somewhat shenanigans. But he's like, Massachusetts just needs 2 years to think about this because, of course, Massachusetts is in favor of marriage equality.
Right.
They're just having a knee-jerk reaction to having something changed because it's the most conservative liberal state in the world.
100%. It's got a lot of that kind of puritanical vibe to it still, even though it's, when any sort of big change is even like ranked choice voting was this massive change. People were hysterical about it.
Right.
I talked on town boards I was Chris Crawford actually, and I and my wife, we were all on the ranked choice voting for, our kind of middle of the state. And we went and looked on like all our town boards and stuff, and there was a ton of people just saying like stuff that had been just repeated by someone that didn't want ranked choice voting or whatever the anti-campaign ended up starting from.
Right.
But yeah, it was crazy. It really was. It met with a big stopping force because it was new and different and change.
Yeah. And I guarantee you the next time it comes through, the same thing with legalizing marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
Next time it comes through, it's going to pass because it just makes so much sense. And obviously, Massachusetts had the best example, best/worst example of ranked choice voting in was it Fall River or New Bedford? I can't remember. But the mayor was indicted by the police, indicted by the FBI. And so they had an election, but he refused to resign.
Yep.
They had an election where they said, okay, we're going to, should we recall the mayor? Yes or no? And then if there's a recall, who do you want the new mayor to be? And the guy who was the mayor, his name was Javier Correa, got his name on the second ballot. He collected enough signatures. And so 60 people voted to recall him. But then because there were 5 candidates, the votes were split so much that he had 35% support and he won the re-election, even though he'd just been recalled.
I think it was Fall River. Yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
It's just insane. And so hopefully Massachusetts will wake up to it. I personally, I'm a big ranked choice voting fan. If somebody can, show me approval voting working, I could, or if it had significant support, but I might consider it. But for me, the thing that I don't like about approval voting is if I do 2016, if I do ranked choice voting, I'm Johnson first, Stein second, Trump third, and Clinton fourth. If I do approval voting, I have to rank Gary Johnson the same as I rank Jill Stein.
Right.
And it just doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm interested. So the Center of Election Science just did a big poll with Libertarian Party of Connecticut, and they've been engaging a lot of libertarians and stuff about ranked choice versus approval voting and things like that. So I just messaged them before the show actually to see if they'll come on and talk about ranked choice versus approval voting in this. I want to see some data behind it and what they are talking about. As far, they seem to have some information on their website, and I'd love to dive in deeper because I'd like to learn more because I know ranked choice voting really well. I have family. I grew up in Maine. So my family and I have a ton of friends and stuff that are all up in Maine still, and they loved it, and they couldn't say enough good things about it. So approval voting it's got an uphill battle with me for sure because I kind of feel the same way as what you were saying.
Yeah, I would take approval voting over first past the post.
Yep.
But I am convinced that either with approval voting or ranked choice voting, Donald Trump doesn't win the Republican nomination in 2016. It just so happened that, he had this core that, and, there's this interesting aspect of electoral science too, where what counts is positives and negatives in looking at a candidate. And if you're a Ted Cruz supporter, you're never going to support George Bush or Jeb Bush. And if you're a Jeb Bush supporter, you're never going to support Ted Cruz, because those are the guys who were locked against each other in the beginning.
Right.
So you're not unified. You're not going to, the Bush supporters don't go over and support Ted Cruz because you know what? Screw that guy. I'm going to vote for Trump. Right. Show them blah, 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 blah. And that's the problem with our first past the post system. So I do think that ranked choice voting is the future of the country, and it makes us better. Because the other thing about it is that, Americans have this belief in the magic of democracy that, if you vote for something, then it's okay. This goes back to consent culture.
Yep.
There's this really dark meme that I'll never share, but I talk about. It actually came out in 2016. And it's the picture is in a frat. It's 4 guys and a girl, and they're all clearly wasted. And the caption is, should they vote on what happens next? Super dark.
Yeah.
But Americans need to wake up to the idea that voting doesn't give you a right to override somebody else's consent.
Right.
Right? There should be no contact without affirmative, informed consent. That is complete consent culture. And no amount of voting takes away your requirement to get my consent to touch me.
Right.
And if we can wake people up to that, we win everything.
Right.
Right? We win the right to be let alone.
Yeah, and I think you can see it in a lot of, I mean, you had some of that mob mentality, in the early 1900s and 1800s and even through the middle of the 1900s through, you had democracy taking away the rights of a group of people because of the color of their skin.
Right.
Democracy was actively doing this.
Yeah.
It doesn't always come with the best outcome. It just means you can convince the majority to do something. And it's like you said, no vote allows someone to take away someone's rights or allows you to do something without their consent. It shouldn't. I mean, it happens today, and it's happening, day after day, but it shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, you can see it all the time. And, obviously taxation is, a tremendous representation of that. You look at this, the stimulus check that's going out right now and the $6 trillion bill, and no taxpayer, if we could have voted on how was the money going to be spent, nobody would have voted to give money for what it is, a symphony that they're paying money to. And you can find all the other graft things in there. Nobody would have voted for any of that stuff. People might have voted for giving relief checks.
Right.
Okay. That's fine. You consent to that. It's fine. But, as Faye Walker says here in the comments, compliance is not consent. It's a critical thing about it. We are stuck in a situation where the government defends the rights of the people who are currently making government,
right,
and nobody else. And so we're in this terrible spot where, we want to be free, and there's a select group of people who don't really want you to have that freedom. We talk about this all the time in terms of occupational licensing.
Yep.
I had, let's see, how can I phrase this? So in Massachusetts, I heard about somebody who wanted to have a new deck built, and they had a friend whose father was a master carpenter in Greece, and they're like, come on over and build it.
Right.
And they ended up getting in trouble because their neighbor ratted them out and said, hey, these people are building something, and I don't see any building permit signs. And so then the inspector comes over, is like, you're a licensed carpenter and you're a union guy and all that stuff, which is insane. Now, here's the thing about it. If they'd actually been building the deck themselves, that would have been okay.
Right.
They still would have to get it inspected afterwards.
Yep.
But because they were actually paying somebody else to do it, which is insane.
Right.
And this ties into everything else and consent culture. How can it be illegal to pay somebody for something that they can do for free?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If this guy had come over and offered to help them build for free as a friend, it would have been completely legal.
Oh, yeah.
But because they're paying him for it, oh no, then it's illegal.
Yeah, I built 20 decks after college. Once my friends bought houses, we all came over. The graduating group of us, we all got together, and most of our dads were carpenters, or we had done some carpentry work. And yeah, I mean, it's funny that it's not. It's awful how the government can put these roadblocks in place and like you said, this guy is a master carpenter, just doesn't happen to have the right credentials that the United States government or the state government or whatever has for Massachusetts or wherever it was.
Well, and the thing about it is that he actually did apply for a carpenter's license that year in Massachusetts, and they told him, right now, the test is almost impossible because there are too many licensed carpenters in Massachusetts. And we adjust the difficulty of the test every year based on, it's terrible.
Right.
And it's just, and
that's
the problem.
At the end of the day, if there's too many, they won't get bid on jobs, and they'll have to find other work. I mean, the whole market system should really, and I'm not saying we should put people out of work. My dad was a carpenter. I don't, sure. But I mean, that should be a pretty easily self-regulating thing. That's not something that, really requires any sort of help from the guy. And I mean, I I do. I try and talk to a ton of folks on the show, and I talk to some folks that say, well, what about having the ability to help people with this tax money and be able to help people who are down on their luck. Believe me, I grew up. My dad was a very principled guy. Walked out on a job because he was a foreman on the job, and the people were not being treated fairly. We're not getting the breaks because they were second shift and not the first shift crew.
Right.
He walked out. He ended up losing his job. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We required the help of the state at the time because that was what was available. But how much better would that have been available if it was a mutual aid group within our community that knew that we needed the help and was able to do so locally? Right. My dad actually went to go figure out how to either repay or try and I basically make it right, basically, that we were taking this money at this time. And in that whole part, thought of, if there was a system that was so much more community based, we would be able to react to these things a lot. But I mean, look at during COVID, unemployment. I had friends that lost their job, was calling unemployment. It took them months and sometimes, 8+ months in order to get that help that they needed. Whereas if it was somewhere in their community and that was a system that kind of, was built up over time with people that could help, it'd be so much more direct and immediate. And
the thing about it is that the government has deliberately undermined mutual aid societies in every way. And, the best example of this is, there's many examples of it, but Michael Bloomberg, when he was the mayor of New York, made it illegal for restaurants to give their food that they didn't sell at the end of the day to homeless shelters. And I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was David Brooks, who wrote an article about it. He said, so these homeless people, if they came into the restaurant at 11:55 and had money, this food would be safe for them to eat. But somehow at 12:05, it was magically unsafe for them to eat.
Right.
It's just insane. The reality of it is that in this case, Bloomberg and his authoritarian iteration of government wants government to own charity because he wants the people to be in debt to charity, as opposed to the idea that we can take care of ourselves. And in reality, we have changed ourselves as a people if we don't believe that we belong to each other. You want to say our country is more divided now than it ever has been? That is a deliberate thing that's been happening. We have been set up to not take care of each other. We've been told that's what government is supposed to do. You don't do that because you're going to do it up. We should be taking care of each other. And my thing, and this is the whole thing with People for Liberty, is that we want it to be a broad-based thing that say the number one thing that we owe to each other is to stand up for each other's freedoms and stand up for each other's liberties. Everything else will sort itself out if we do that one thing. And our country used to know that.
Yeah. And I feel like, even just the talking to neighbors, or even, if you need help from a neighbor, it feels so much worse now to ask a neighbor versus asking for some sort of state-driven organization. And at the end of the day, your neighbor's I'm very happy to help anyone that would need help. Shoveling a driveway, buying a round of grocery, whatever I could do to help that week or that month or whatever, I would be glad to do. But it just doesn't happen as much anymore because we're almost, like you said, kind of really programmed to look to the state for those kind of assistance pieces.
Yeah, there's a thing where how people's houses of worship or whatever they are the only other place that people think they can go to for any sort of help right now. And the problem is that now, for houses of worship, I like to think that's something that we still do well in the United States. We have better religious tolerance. I won't say perfect, but we have better religious tolerance in the United States than any other country, right? We have Jews and Christians and Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and Zoroastrians and pagans. Shout out to my Salem, Massachusetts friends. Wiccans, everybody else. We all live together in relative harmony. And at no point in time does anybody think, because Wiccans might win an election in Salem, Massachusetts, then now everybody in Salem is going to have to celebrate all the Wiccan holidays. Okay? We wouldn't think that.
Right.
So why do we think that Republicans or Democrats or even libertarians, if we win elections, we should get to impose our idea of what charity is, of what the government should be doing on anything like that? We have great religious tolerance. We need to have more governmental and policy tolerance. I think the idea of having people work, having people accept the fact, and this is a Larry Sharp phrase, Republicans should be able to be as Republican as they want to be. Democrats can be as Democrat as they want to be. Just don't make anybody else live by your rules.
Yep. Yeah, and I heard you actually say that this past weekend at the Massachusetts State Convention, and it really rang true. I have friends that are Democrats, Republicans. I have a ton of friends in a bunch of different political ideologies, and I always say I want you guys to be represented. Yeah. I just want to be represented as well, and right now it's just not happening. And I think there's and I want Greens to be represented. I want Democratic Socialists to be. I am not naive enough to think that I have the answers for everything. I think my answers are the best for me, but there might not be the best for someone else. And I want those voices to be heard. And I think the right answers will prove themselves right, when people hear them. And I just want people to hear them.
Right. One of my favorite libertarian books that people don't, a lot of people haven't read, is Hayek's Fatal Conceit. And in it, one of the things that he talks about, he says, look at this amazing world that we live in, right? Where's my phone? The sum of human knowledge available to me right here.
Yeah.
Libertarians bitch about the roads, but I can get in my car right now and I could drive all the way to Anchorage, Alaska, and the roads would be in pretty good shape. Modern medicine, look at what's happening right now. All these amazing things.
Yeah.
The fatal conceit is that any of this could have happened in a planned governmental system. What happened is that we had a free market system where every successful business is the result of a marketplace where 10 businesses failed.
Right.
It is the failures that is critical to providing the path to success. It's, Fox just posted this thing. It says, we need good ideas no matter who presents them. That's 100% it. Put all the ideas into the marketplace and then let the market pick the thing out that works the best for them. And maybe there's 2, maybe there's 3, and there's different things for different people. It's nice that we could have, we don't have to have a one size fits all solution.
Right.
But that idea of, everybody being able to put an idea forward, not just the ones that are blessed by the government, that's a critical concept for us.
And if you think about it, it's a lot easier to vote at the ballot box for something that's going to be bad for you in the end. It's very easy to be tricked into that. It is very difficult nowadays, especially with things like Yelp and all the Amazon reviews, to buy something that is super bad for you with your dollar.
Right.
It is way easier to vote for something bad at the ballot box than it is to buy. It's just you have so much of your self-interest because you've earned all of those dollars.
That's a brilliant statement, Derek. I am taxing that one.
No worries.
That's 100% right. Because lots of times people vote for something and they don't know what it's going to, they don't know what's going to happen. They think, I'm going to give it a shot. Whereas, exactly right, with an Amazon review, I can tell you recently, 3 things that I did not buy because I dug through the reviews and somebody's like, this doesn't work. It breaks right away.
Yep.
Something like that. That's, I don't want to say that we needed that level of technology, but that sort of accountability is something that we don't have in government at all.
Right.
And we wouldn't need it if government didn't have that much power.
Right.
The problem is that government has the power to screw up our lives. If government just made suggestions, stuff like that, and we could evaluate them, we say, okay, you know what? You make the suggestion you wanted. That I will say that all the time. So I am a person who, let's really stir up the audience. I really do believe that the virus is real and that it's dangerous, and that I wear a mask because, so I'm also I'll admit this here. Most of my guns were lost in a tragic boating accident, but I am a gun owner.
Yep.
And whenever I handle a weapon, I treat it as if it's loaded, even if I don't know, especially if I don't know whether it is. And so when I go out in public, I treat myself with the possibility that I actually might be infected and not know it yet. I might be pre-symptomatic. And so just like I treat a weapon like it's loaded, I don't have my finger on the trigger, right? Yep. When I go out, I treat my mouth as if it's loaded.
Yep.
I'm not doing it out of any other reason. So, what was my point going to be about that, though?
I have a
Damn it.
little anecdote,
Go.
hopefully it'll
Let's
help you.
hear it.
So the reason, and I'm the same way, and one of the biggest reasons that it didn't even seem that much of a thing when masks became kind of a thing. So I was a mechanical engineer for a long time, worked for Bose. We manufacturing, and some supply chain was in China. So I spent a bit of time between then and my current job as a sales engineer for manufacturing companies in China, Taiwan, Japan. And it is just the culture that when you are sick, you don't want to pass it to someone else. So you put a mask on for everyone else's sake so that you're not passing your germs on to someone. It's the most considerate thing I've ever seen play out as a cultural thing. And it blew me away. I went there and I saw this happening. It was strange at first, but then I started thinking and talking to my friends that were Chinese and Taiwanese and stuff. And why do people do this? And they said, well, it's so you don't get someone else sick. And it just became such a, why are we not doing this in the United States?
And that's what my point was going to be, is that when the government said, oh, now there's a mask mandate, you know what? I am a person who, if you ask me to put my shoulder to the wheel to help move something heavy, I'm there. I'm going to do it. But if you try to harness me, I am going to spit the bit and I will bite you if I can.
Yep.
And so that's the same thing. This thing about, a mask mandate, if they'd come out and said, we think that the best thing for you to keep other people safe is to wear a mask. And we got, celebrities. I mean, I'm trying to think who's the celebrity that, they get Trey Parker out there. And he's saying, the little face South Park thing, wearing a mask so that you don't kill Kenny.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Something like that. I'm on board with it. And I think a lot of people would be.
Right.
Whoever the celebrities are. But when they tell you have to do something, first of all, it's the government. And so that they fucked it up somehow.
Yep.
And then the second thing about it is that it's authoritarian.
Yeah.
Just ask us to do the right thing instead of implying that society is so broken that we have to be led, that we have to be shepherded. The people are not sheep.
Right.
You don't need shepherds.
And it further goes into kind of the duopoly rhetoric of, well, the other side is going to be mean and they're not good, kind people, whatever the other side, and so they're not going to do X. So the government has to mandate, and that's how they get away with it. The government has to mandate it, or the people on the other side of the red or blue, whatever team you are, the opposite folks, they're not going to do what we need them to do to be a successful society. Right.
Yeah. And that's where the things are broken. And that's, to circle back around, let me plug People for Liberty, peopleforliberty.org. That's, the number one thing that we want to do is to make everybody realize that at some point in time, there's a much broader coalition of people who have had an experience with the government where the government has done them wrong and suppressed their liberty. And for us to connect with the people who have that realization, we just got to stick with it, and we really will make it win.
Yeah.
That's the magical thing about it, is finding a way to make everybody else realize. A lot of the times libertarians campaign and say, hey man, I want you to be free. And most Americans will say, well, I am free.
Right.
Because they don't know what it is. You say, really, are you free? Well, can you buy medical marijuana? Can you buy regular marijuana in your state? Can you, purchase a firearm?
Can you go fishing? Just go. You want to go fishing one day because it's a nice day out. Try and go fishing and see what happens when a game warden comes up on you.
Yeah, exactly.
That blows my mind. Those, and it seems like such a little thing, but it's a huge thing. And those fines are such a massive tax on the folks who don't have the means to pay those fines. I mean, it's well for everyone, but more importantly, like, you could miss a month's rent. You could miss a week of buying groceries because someone says that you need a license in order to go fishing at the hole that's right around the corner from where you live.
Well, and there's a huge criminal justice issue there, where there is one of the founding principles of our country was that there were never going to be debtors' prisons, and that if you accumulated a debt, you owe it, and there's all sorts of civil consequences if you don't pay it back, but you shouldn't go to jail for debt.
Right.
But now what's happened is that if you have debt, people take you to court and you have to have all these appearances all the time. And then if you miss one of those appearances because you're trying to work so that you can earn money to pay back your debt. Then they have you for missing a thing, and then you get a warrant. You have to go to jail. You miss more work. You get further into debt. There's Southern Poverty Law Center. A lot of people don't like them for a lot of reasons. I recommend reading everything, even the people who don't like. Read the Southern Poverty Law Center report on the return of debtors' prisons in the South, and it's horrifying.
Yep.
It is a terrible thing that's going on right now, and it's something that libertarians can speak about.
Yeah. So we are, beyond what I typically go, but I love talking with you, Dan. I could talk with you for hours and hours. So I want to give you another moment to plug People for Liberty or whatever, anything that you got going on that's coming up.
So I'll tell people my name is Dan Fishman. I am the executive director of the People for Liberty. You can go to peopleforliberty.org. It's number 4, peopleforliberty.org.
Just put it in the comments.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Go there, sign up for our newsletter. I don't want to go too much into it, but Monday we're going to have a huge announcement, shake the libertarian world, such as it is. And so I'm teasing it first here on Post Political Podcast.
Perfect. No, I'm excited. And I've been excited with everything, especially the early stuff when they were doing things during the campaign, when they brought you on. Like every step I've seen People for Liberty take has been, in my opinion, a positive step. Even though you and I haven't had a ton of interaction together, I've seen a lot of the stuff you've done, Dan. I really respect you and appreciate the work that you've put in for the party and third parties in general.
Actually, let me plug one more thing. peopleforliberty.org/legislation. This is a program that we've just started. If you know of liberty limiting legislation, or what we call liberty opposing legislation, LOL, anywhere in the country, please enter it into that website there. We are building up a database, and then we are notifying members in our area, in our list, hey, there's some legislation going on that you can get involved in. There's a group that you can meet up with, something like that, because that's something where we can build a lot of coalitions. It's easy for libertarians to get together with people, and right now in Memphis, there's this big fight over this pipeline, and the local Libertarian County Party is working with a progressive group that started the opposition because they're also going to seize a bunch of the land for the pipeline with eminent domain. And so Libertarians are like, hey, we're with you on this. And what they're finding out is that they actually have 7 or 8 issues that they can work together on, and they don't have to fight against each other, even though the political masters are all furious. Some of the high-end Democrats said to them, like, why are you letting libertarians get involved in this? And they said, look, the libertarians showed up and they fucking worked. That's what we need. We need people who are going to work to stop the pipeline.
100%. And I'm looking to I actually want to try and make some connections with the Democrats that are pushing for the decriminalization of sex work in Massachusetts. Awesome. I know Daniel Reek is doing, some work there, and I'd love to get in contact with those folks and promote it and try and get as much support as we can.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer. Massachusetts should lead on that. I agree.
Yeah. No, well, I got to thank you so much, Dan. I hope to have you back sometime because this was great. And, anything that you have on People for Liberty stuff, I think Lauren posts every once in a while. We have a post-political community, which is just kind of a group that we post a bunch of articles and different things for decriminalizing a bunch of stuff. We have stuff from DSA and progressive left and libertarians, and there's really good conversation. I mean, some folks get into it a little bit, but for the most part, we're really just trying to learn about what each other want to do and kind of build together as best we can. That's kind of the ilk of the podcast, and we're hoping to do that. So. No, I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful night, and thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you, Derek. What a pleasure to be on Post Political Podcast.
Thanks. Well, that was Dan Fishman, and he is, executive director of People for Liberty, but he does so much more. He, came on and did the MC for the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts this past weekend. We got to hear a bunch of these anecdotes that you guys heard, but also some others as well. He's helped, I was on the phone with him about a write-in campaign last year for Supreme for Senate. There's, a ton of stuff that Dan has helped out with the party, and he's never, that I've seen said, no, I can't help you. Just go figure something else out on your own. He'll always at least find like the way to help you. If he can't help you, someone else that can. I can't say enough great things about Dan, and I really appreciate him coming on. I want to promote next week as well. I mean, Thursday as well. Sorry, the next guest. So later on this week on Thursday, Stacey Pressman, New York City mayor candidate. She is also a stand-up comic, radio host, and an actress. So it should be a really great time on the podcast. She is really centering her platform on giving more power back to the people and less to the government in New York City. Very difficult place for a libertarian messaging to ring through, but it's happening. I know friends on the campaign, and it's going well already early on, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say and some of the stuff that she has planned for this next year. So I hope you enjoyed us tonight, and I hope you join us on Thursday and come back and listen to Stacey and I talk a little bit more about her campaign. And I hope you had enjoyed your time on the Post Political Podcast. Thanks.